The heavy oak doors of the cathedral slammed open, echoing like a gunshot over the grieving crowd. Rain-soaked and gasping for air, Maya pointed a trembling finger at the polished mahogany casket. "Stop," she screamed, her voice cracking the dead silence. "Don't bury him. He is still alive." The relentless Los Angeles rain was washing the grease and grit down the gutters of Normandy Avenue when the door to Bronson's diner violently swung open. Maya Brooks didn't even look up from the counter she was wiping down. At 2 in the morning, the diner usually only attracted drunks, insomniacs, or trouble. But when she heard the heavy, wet thud of a body collapsing against the jukebox, her heart dropped into her stomach. She hurried around the counter, her worn black sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. Slumped against the neon-lit machine was a man in a bespoke, charcoal-gray suit that probably cost more than Maya's rent for an entire year. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his breathing was shallow, a ragged hiss escaping his lips. But it was the dark, spreading stain on his right side that caught her attention. Blood. A lot of it. "Hey, hey," Maya whispered, dropping to her knees and pressing her diner apron against his wound. "Stay awake. I'm calling an ambulance." Before her fingers could dial 911 on her phone, a cold, vice-like grip wrapped around her wrist. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were piercing, calculated, and completely devoid of panic, despite the fact that he was bleeding out on a diner floor. "No hospitals," he rasped, his voice a low, commanding baritone. "No cops. They'll finish the job." Maya stared at him. She was a 24-year-old waitress drowning in student debt and medical bills from her late mother's battle with cancer. She couldn't afford a criminal investigation, but as she looked into his eyes, she saw a flicker of profound desperation, masked by sheer willpower. "You're going to die here," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Hide me," he demanded, his grip loosening as he began to lose consciousness again. 5 minutes. Just hide me." The screech of tires outside made Maya's blood run cold. 2 black SUVs had just aggressively mounted the curb. Heavy boots splashed into the puddles outside the diner's glass windows. Maya had to make a choice that would permanently alter the trajectory of her life. She hoisted the man up. He was incredibly heavy, built with dense muscle, and dragged him behind the counter, hauling him toward the back kitchen. She shoved him into the walk-in freezer, propping him up behind a towering stack of frozen beef ribs. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, pulling the heavy steel door shut just as the bell above the diner's entrance chimed. Maya practically flew back to the front counter, grabbing a mop and frantically swiping at the trail of blood on the floor, praying the dim lighting and the smell of industrial bleach would mask the evidence. 3 men walked in. They wore dark trench coats and expressions carved from stone. The man leading the pack had a jagged scar running down his jaw. Maya later learned his name was Vincent Gallagher, a notorious enforcer for a rival faction. "We're closed," Maya said, keeping her head down, pouring herself a cup of black coffee to stop her hands from shaking. "We're looking for someone," Vincent said, his voice a menacing purr. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the empty booths, the jukebox, and finally, the freshly mopped floor. "A guy in a suit. Looks like he had a bad night. You seen him?" Maya looked Vincent dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of street-smart resilience she had built growing up in South LA. "Mister, the only thing that's come through those doors tonight is a stray cat, and even he didn't want the meatloaf. You want a coffee, or do you want to leave? Because I'm trying to mop." Vincent stared at her, a terrifying, unblinking gaze that felt like it was peeling back her skin. He leaned over the counter, so close she could smell the stale tobacco and peppermint on his breath. For an agonizing 10 seconds, the diner was entirely silent, except for the hum of the neon sign outside. "Check the back," Vincent barked to his men. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The men kicked open the swinging kitchen doors. She heard them opening cabinets, kicking over trash cans. Then, she heard the heavy latch of the walk-in freezer being pulled. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the gunfire. "Nothing in here but frozen patties and dead air. Boss," one of the men yelled back. Maya exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. Vincent scowled, tossing a crumpled $20 bill onto the counter. "Buy yourself something nice, sweetheart." Once the SUVs sped off into the rainy night, Maya locked the front door, pulled the blinds, and ran to the freezer. She found the man wedged behind the boxes, shivering violently, his skin pale as snow. The men hadn't seen him in the dark corner. She dragged him out into the warmth of the kitchen, broke open the diner's industrial first aid kit, and did something she had only seen in movies. Using gauze, medical tape, and a terrifying amount of pressure, she managed to stop the bleeding. For 2 hours, they sat on the floor of the kitchen. He finally introduced himself as Daniel Sterling. What he didn't tell her then was that he was the head of the K-Town Syndicate, an underground empire of real estate, gambling, and imports that he had inherited. Despite the syndicate's deep Korean roots, Daniel went by his late American father's surname to seamlessly move through high society circles, leaving the brutal street-level operations in the shadows. "Why did you stick your neck out for a ghost?" Daniel asked, his dark eyes studying her face under the fluorescent kitchen lights. "I don't like bullies," Maya said simply, handing him a mug of hot tea. "And you looked like you were out of options." Daniel took a sip, never breaking eye contact. "I don't forget debts, Maya Brooks." When the sun began to peek over the Hollywood Hills, a sleek black town car arrived at the back alley. A driver helped Daniel into the back seat. Before the door closed, Daniel pressed a heavy, cold object into Maya's palm. It was a solid silver lighter, heavily engraved with a crest she didn't recognize. "Keep it safe," he said softly. Then, he was gone. For 3 weeks, Maya convinced herself the night at the diner was a fever dream. She went back to serving pancakes and pouring bad coffee, but her eyes constantly darted to the door every time the bell chimed. Then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, he walked in. Daniel Sterling looked entirely different. The blood and pallor were gone, replaced by an aura of immaculate power. He wore a tailored navy suit, a platinum watch gleaming on his wrist. He sat in her section and ordered black coffee. He didn't speak of the night she saved his life. But when he left, the tip under his saucer was an envelope containing $10,000 in crisp, untraceable bills, alongside a note. "Dinner tomorrow, 8 p.m. Wear something warm." That dinner was the beginning of a dangerously intoxicating romance. Daniel pulled Maya out of her grueling reality and into a world of hidden luxury. They dined in private booths at the Musso and Frank Grill, walked the empty grounds of the Getty Villa after hours, and spent nights in a secluded glass mansion overlooking Mulholland Drive. But Daniel's world was a fortress of secrets. He finally confessed who he was, the undisputed boss of a massive criminal organization, currently engaged in a brutal turf war with an aggressive rival faction. He told her about the violence, the extortion, the constant paranoia. "I should let you go," Daniel told her one night, holding her close as they looked out over the glittering grid of Los Angeles. "Being near me puts a target on your back." "I'm not afraid of the dark," Maya replied, leaning into his chest. She had fallen deeply in love with the man behind the myth, the man who was surprisingly gentle, fiercely protective, and deeply burdened by the empire he was born into. However, Daniel kept Maya a strict secret from his syndicate. The only person who knew about her was Simon Hayes, Daniel's most trusted lieutenant and right-hand man. Simon was a charming, smooth-talking enforcer who always smiled, though his eyes remained chillingly hollow. Maya never liked Simon. Something about the way he looked at Daniel was laced with a quiet, festering envy. 6 months into their secret relationship, the empire crumbled. It was a Thursday night. Daniel told Maya he had a critical sit-down at a shipping warehouse in San Pedro. It was supposed to be a peace treaty with the rivals. "I'll be at your apartment by midnight," he promised, kissing her forehead. "We're going to take a long vacation after this, just you and me." Midnight came and went. Then 2 a.m., then 4 a.m. At 6 a.m., the breaking news alert flashed across Maya's television screen. Massive explosion at San Pedro docks. Unidentified body recovered from the wreckage. Maya's world stopped spinning. The news anchors reported that a prominent Los Angeles businessman, Daniel Sterling, was presumed dead after his armored SUV was detonated outside the warehouse. The police confirmed the recovery of a body burned beyond recognition, identified only by Daniel's signature-engraved platinum watch and a distinct titanium surgical pin in the collarbone. Maya collapsed onto her living room floor, her screams muffled by the roaring in her ears. The man she loved was gone. For 2 days, She existed in a catatonic state of grief. Because she was a secret, she couldn't mourn publicly. She wasn't the grieving widow, she was just the waitress in the shadows. The syndicate moved with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours, Simon Hayes had assumed control of the organization. He publicly declared a ceasefire and rapidly organized a lavish, closed-casket funeral for Daniel at the prestigious Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels in downtown LA. The speed of it all gnawed at Maya's instincts. It was too fast. Simon's immediate rise to power, the sudden peace with the rivals who supposedly killed his boss, it reeked of a setup. On the morning of the funeral, Maya sat on her bed, staring at the silver lighter Daniel had given her on the night they met. He had told her to keep it safe. Frustrated and grieving, she threw the lighter against the hardwood floor. It cracked open. Maya froze. The bottom casing of the solid silver lighter had popped loose. It wasn't just a lighter. It was a concealment device. Her trembling fingers reached inside the hollow chamber and pulled out a tiny, tightly rolled piece of waterproof paper and a miniature SIM card. She unrolled the paper. It was written in Daniel's precise handwriting. "If Simon tells you I am dead, do not believe him. Put this SIM in a burner. Trust no one." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scrambled to her closet, found an old, deactivated smartphone, and shoved the SIM card into the tray. The phone booted up, searching for a signal. For agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, a single, automated text message populated the screen. It was time-stamped from an encrypted server, scheduled to send if Daniel didn't input a daily code. The message read, "Street Jude's Medical Center, basement level, freight entrance." He was alive. But if Simon was burying a body today to solidify his takeover, he was burying evidence. And once Daniel was officially laid to rest, Simon would have the ultimate power to hunt Daniel down and finish the job properly. Maya threw on a black trench coat, grabbed the keys to her beat-up Honda, and drove through the pouring rain toward the cathedral. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the only person standing between the man she loved and a permanent grave. She parked illegally on Temple Street and sprinted up the sweeping concrete steps of the cathedral. Heavily armed men in sharp suits stood at the entrance, Simon's men. They didn't know her face. She slipped through a side corridor used by the choir, her wet sneakers making no sound against the marble. She reached the back of the massive, echoing nave. Hundreds of people in black sat in the pews. At the altar, bathed in soft, hypocritical light, stood Simon Hayes, delivering a tearful eulogy over a massive mahogany casket. Daniel was more than a leader. "He was my brother," Simon lied, his voice echoing through the microphone. "And today, we commit his body to the earth, and his soul to the heavens." Maya checked her burner phone one last time. Another message had just pushed through. This one live, not automated. "Maya, they found me. They're coming." He was out of time. She was out of time. Maya kicked open the heavy oak doors, the sound cracking through the cathedral like a thunderclap. "Stop!" she screamed, sprinting down the center aisle, pointing a trembling finger at the polished mahogany casket. "Don't bury him! He is still alive!" The sheer audacity of her scream paralyzed the entire congregation. For 3 agonizing seconds, the massive cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels was completely silent, save for the rain lashing against the stained glass windows. Hundreds of heads, belonging to some of the most dangerous and powerful men on the West Coast, snapped toward the back of the nave. At the altar, Simon Hayes's mask of grief slipped. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his face before he quickly smoothed it into a look of condescending pity. "Security!" Simon commanded, his voice echoing through the PA system, tight and dangerous. "Get this deranged woman out of here. She's clearly disturbed." 3 massive men in black suits began sprinting down the aisle toward Maya. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but Daniel had taught her enough about the syndicate's hierarchy during their late-night conversations to know exactly what to do. She couldn't fight them, but she could sow the seeds of absolute chaos. She locked eyes with a severe-looking, silver-haired man sitting in the front pew. Arthur Caldwell. He was the old guard consigliere, a man who had served Daniel's father and possessed a fiercely loyal, traditional code of honor. "Arthur Caldwell!" Maya shrieked at the top of her lungs, stepping backward toward the heavy oak doors. The Cayman offshore accounts require a dual biometric transfer. The master PIN is your daughter's birthday. Simon doesn't have it because Daniel never gave it to him. Arthur Caldwell froze. The entire front row of syndicate capos stiffened. That financial protocol was an ultra-classified secret, known only to the boss and his most trusted advisor. There was no way a random, deranged civilian could possess that information. "Halt!" Arthur roared, standing up and raising a single, authoritative hand. Simon's security men hesitated, looking between Arthur and Simon. "I said get her out of here!" Simon yelled, his polished veneer cracking as he stepped away from the casket. "She's a rival plant. Kill her! Anyone who touches that girl answers to me," Arthur countered, drawing a sleek Kimber 1911 from his shoulder holster. In an instant, a dozen of Arthur's loyalists drew their weapons, aiming them directly at Simon's men. The solemn funeral had just transformed into a Mexican standoff. "Check the body, Arthur," Maya yelled, her hand gripping the brass handle of the cathedral door. "Look at the surgical pin in the collarbone. It's a titanium fake." Simon blew up the warehouse, not the rivals. Using the erupting chaos to her advantage, Maya threw her weight against the heavy doors and bolted into the torrential Los Angeles rain. She could hear the muffled shouts and the terrifying crack of a single gunshot echoing from inside the church as she sprinted down Temple Street. She threw herself into her beat-up Honda, her hands shaking so violently she could barely get the key into the ignition. Tires screeching against the wet asphalt, she sped away, heading straight for Street Jude's Medical Center. The hospital was a towering, sterile monolith on the edge of the city. Maya bypassed the brightly lit emergency room and drove around to the back alley, parking near the loading docks. The burner phone in her pocket buzzed again. Sub-basement B, boiler room 4. She slipped through the unlocked freight entrance, navigating the maze of flickering fluorescent lights, exposed pipes, and the heavy smell of bleach and ozone. She descended a concrete stairwell, her wet sneakers squeaking softly. When she pushed open the heavy steel door to boiler room 4, the oppressive heat hit her instantly. The room was massive, filled with the deafening hum of industrial water heaters. In the center of the room, lying on a rusted metal workbench under a single, swaying utility bulb, was Daniel. He looked terrible. His left arm was heavily bandaged, a dark red stain seeping through the white gauze. His face was bruised, covered in soot and minor lacerations, and he was hooked up to an IV bag hanging from an overhead pipe. Standing over him was a terrified, sweating man in a blood-stained doctor's coat. Dr. Harrison Clark, an underground physician who owed Daniel his life. "Maya," Daniel breathed, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Despite the agony he was clearly in, a faint, relieved smile touched his lips. "You stupid, stubborn idiot," Maya choked out, running to his side and pressing her forehead against his uninjured shoulder. Tears mixed with the rain on her face. "You're alive. I told you I wouldn't leave you," he whispered, his good hand coming up to stroke her damp hair. "When the bomb went off, I was thrown into the storm drain. Dr. Clark found me before Simon's sweepers did." "Simon knows," Maya said frantically, pulling back. "He knows you aren't in that casket. I just blew his funeral wide open. He's going to send everyone." "He already did." A chilling, familiar voice echoed from the doorway. Maya spun around. Standing in the entrance to the boiler room was Vincent Gallagher, the rival enforcer with the jagged scar from the diner. He was accompanied by 4 heavily armed men. Well, Vincent purred, racking the slide of his tactical shotgun. "The brave little waitress from Normandy Avenue. I should have shot you that night." "Vincent," Daniel said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he struggled to sit up. "Simon is playing you. He paid you to plant the bomb, and now he's going to wipe out your entire faction under the guise of avenging my death. You're a pawn." "Maybe," Vincent sneered, "but right now, Simon is paying me $10 million to bring him your head in a duffel bag, and I never leave a job unfinished." Maya's mind raced. She was unarmed, Doctor. Clark was cowering in the corner, and Daniel could barely stand. They were trapped in a concrete box with 5 armed killers. But Maya was a waitress who had worked the graveyard shift in South LA for 5 years. She knew how to handle a rush, and she knew how to use her environment. She noticed the massive, red industrial tanks strapped to the wall near the doorway. Highly flammable, pure ethanol, used for cleaning the hospital's massive boiler intake valves. 10 million is a lot of money, Vincent, Maya said, her voice trembling just enough to sound terrified as she slowly backed away from the workbench, moving closer to the tanks. But you're not going to live to spend it. Vincent laughed, aiming the shotgun at Daniel's chest. And who's going to stop me? You? Maya reached into her trench coat pocket, her fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy, silver lighter Daniel had given her. The concealment chamber was still broken open, but the ignition wheel worked perfectly. Yeah, me, Maya said. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the heavy wrench sitting on the workbench and hurled it with all her might at the brass valve of the ethanol tank. The wrench struck true, snapping the pressurized valve. A massive, high-pressure geyser of pure, highly flammable chemical solvent sprayed directly across the doorway, soaking Vincent and his men in an instant. "What the?" Vincent shouted, wiping the stinging liquid from his eyes. Maya flicked the silver lighter. The flames sparked to life. "Get down!" Daniel roared. Maya threw the lit silver lighter directly into the puddle, forming at Vincent's feet, and dove under the heavy metal workbench. Whoosh! A wall of blue and orange fire erupted, instantly igniting the doorway. The confined space turned into a blazing inferno. Vincent and his men screamed, dropping their weapons as they blindly scrambled backward into the hallway, patting down their burning clothes. The fire suppression system in the hallway instantly kicked on, raining down water, but the element of surprise was complete. "Go! Now!" Daniel yelled. Adrenaline masking his injuries, he grabbed Maya's hand. They bypassed the burning doorway, slipping through a secondary maintenance hatch Dr. Clark had propped open. They emerged into the pouring rain of the back alley. Maya practically carried Daniel to her Honda, shoving him into the passenger seat before peeling out into the chaotic Los Angeles traffic. "Arthur Caldwell," Daniel gritted out, clutching his bleeding arm. "Take me to his estate in Bel Air. If he heard what you said at the church, he's waiting for my call." By the time they reached the heavily gated Bel Air mansion, Arthur's men were already swarming the perimeter. When Arthur saw Daniel stumble out of the Honda, the stoic, hardened mob boss openly wept, dropping to his knees to kiss Daniel's hand. "They told us you were Ash, boss," Arthur choked out. "It takes more than a coward with a car bomb to kill me, Arthur," Daniel said coldly. "Where is Simon?" "He fled the cathedral," Arthur replied, his eyes hardening. He retreated to the penthouse at the Grand Wilshire. He's surrounded by his personal guard, locking down the syndicate's assets. Daniel looked at Maya. She was soaked in rain, covered in soot, and shivering, but her eyes burned with an unyielding fire. He reached out, gently wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek. "You saved my life." "Again," Daniel whispered. "Now, let me finish this. You stay here. You'll be safe." Maya shook her head, her jaw set. "I didn't crash a Mafia funeral and blow up a hospital basement to sit on the sidelines. We finish this together." 3 hours later, the doors to the Grand Wilshire penthouse elevator chimed open. Simon Hayes was frantically packing a duffel bag with stacks of bearer bonds and passports, screaming at his security chief on the phone. "I don't care if Arthur has the capos. Lock down the ports," Simon yelled into the receiver. "That won't be necessary, Simon." A voice echoed through the sprawling, opulent room. Simon dropped the phone. He turned slowly, his face draining of all color. Standing in the entryway was Daniel Sterling. He was no longer the bleeding man in the boiler room. He had washed the soot from his face and borrowed a crisp, tailored black suit from Arthur. He looked like the Grim Reaper incarnate. Flanking him were Arthur Caldwell and a dozen heavily armed syndicate loyalists. And standing right beside Daniel, holding her head high, was Maya. "Daniel," Simon stammered, his eyes darting toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "Brother, it was the rivals. I swear to God, I thought you were dead. I stepped up to protect your legacy." "My legacy," Daniel repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He walked slowly across the Persian rug, stopping inches from his former best friend. You sold my life to Vincent Gallagher for a seat at the table. You tried to bury me in a closed casket while my blood was still warm. Simon lunged for a pistol on the glass coffee table. He never made it. Daniel moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Simon by the throat and slamming him backward against the reinforced glass of the penthouse window. Below them, the sprawling, neon-lit grid of Los Angeles stretched out into the dark. You wanted the crown, Simon? Daniel whispered, his grip tightening as Simon gasped for air. You can have it, but you don't get the kingdom. Daniel released his grip just enough for Simon to breathe. He looked back at Arthur. Strip him of everything, his assets, his accounts, his name. Leave him on the street with nothing. If anyone in the syndicate offers him a glass of water, they answer to me. Consider it done, boss. Arthur nodded grimly. Daniel turned his back on the gasping, ruined man. He walked over to Maya, intertwining his fingers with hers. The storm outside had finally broken, and the first rays of dawn were piercing through the Los Angeles smog. Arthur, Daniel said, not taking his eyes off Maya. I'm done. The syndicate is yours. Keep the peace, honor the old codes, and keep the violence off the streets. Arthur's eyes widened in shock. Boss, you can't just walk away. You are the king. Daniel smiled faintly. I died on Thursday, Arthur. You buried me this morning. The king is dead. He looked down at Maya, the waitress who had dragged him out of the shadows and fought a war to keep him in the light. Let's go home. The Los Angeles underworld still whispers about the waitress who crashed a Mafia funeral and vanished with a ghost. Today, Maya and Daniel live quietly on a vineyard in Tuscany, far from the blood and neon of their past. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't surviving the darkness, but dragging the one you love into the light. The king died that day, but the man lived on.